This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
On today's episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Stephen Lubka. Stephen is a managing director, head of private client and family offices at Swan Bitcoin. He's a macro Bitcoin expert. He's also a walking and sunshine maximalist. So on this episode, we mostly talked about sunshine, your light environment, circadian health. Talked a little bit about Bitcoin at the end, but it's a really cool conversation, and we tied in health and decentralization. So this was a great conversation with Stephen. Let's dive in.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Decentralized Radio. We have Stephen here on the line. Stephen, how's it going?
It's great, my friend. It's going never a dull day lately, but going great.
This is a much anticipated conversation, I would say. And yeah, really looking forward to getting this out to you guys that are listening, to all the folks on Bitcoin Twitter. So Stephen and I have been kind of going back and forth about the sun and the importance of sunlight and getting outside and walking and all that, and trying to educate the Bitcoiners. So it's kind of been actually really fun. But there have been some naysayers, of course, as well. And it's crazy. I think every day I see some new big account. Like yesterday, like Nick Carter was talking about this. And I was just, Ari Paul was defending sunscreen or something, or it's adding some context. So it's just really funny to me. I guess it's good. It always gets tough when you get into this, like, we're all Bitcoiners, but then people try and give a bunch of health recommendations and stuff like that. So I guess, how did you get into this? What is your journey of walking outside and learning about the importance of sunlight and natural living? Let's start there.
Let me put a pin in that, because I want to comment on what you just said on Bitcoiners and health advice. And because I've been thinking about this lately, and this just kind of bubbled up for me recently. In my opinion, Bitcoin is not only a technology, right? It's not only like a technology and a money and an asset and an industry, but I've come to believe it's a cultural movement. And I won't try to define that based on the content, as in what Bitcoiners believe or what the cultural movement is about. I actually think trying to do that doesn't help one understand it. But I think the better way to understand it is that Bitcoiners are concerned and questioning our cultural assumptions. And maybe different people come to different conclusions. There's a lot of debate and argument. I'm not saying everyone believes the same thing, but the Bitcoin community in many ways is a group of people that is very willing to question and explore our current cultural assumptions. And when I say cultural assumptions, I can mean anything from recommendations on sun exposure to food to physical lifestyle to anything else, to how we think about knowledge, to how we navigate political organization. But we live in an era where I think there is so little questioning going on, and especially like high quality questioning. There's, of course, reactionary contrarianism that's just like knee jerk and not thought through, but true inquiry, true dialogue of these things. And I'll kind of give an example here of why I think that's so important. So in some of these the contention you were talking about on Bitcoin Twitter, right? Like there's often like some of the pushback on the sun stuff will be, well, this contradicts this body of research. There's this body of research, and what you're saying essentially goes against that. And so let's unpack that for a second. So, okay, what is the research about? Well, it's about human health. And so if you're saying I'm wrong and the research is correct, you're implicitly saying the research is correct about how to do health or how to be in good health. And people are following this research. So then it's fair to ask the question, are they healthy? So if the research is right and people are following the recommendations, then people should be very healthy right now. And they're not. Like, disease rates are skyrocketing, skin cancers are skyrocketing, melanoma is skyrocketing, diabetes is skyrocketing. So if people are following the recommendations of the literature and they're not healthy, how do you square that circle, right? We have to question. We have, especially when the modern recommendations throw out thousands of years of evolutionary history, right? Like, and so I see Bitcoiners as a group of people that gets that. And there's this cultural revision, like this force of cultural revisionism that I'm so passionate about. And like, I was in the Bitcoin community as a Bitcoiner. And then to finally answer your question, like these other interests, which I was actually really into all of these things far before I discovered Bitcoin. And kind of midway through my Bitcoin, experience, I realized that this was a community that was really open to those discussions. And so I started talking about it more.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think the whole issue with some Bitcoiners is I think they're very siloed and like that's all they know. And it's like, we fix the money, we fix the world, sure. But like there's other aspects of decentralization, health being like one of the main ones that is extremely important if you want to be outside of the system and be more empowered as an individual. So 100% aligned on there. And that's why we've seen, the carnivore movement, the seed oil free movement, like this has all been like pretty prevalent in the Bitcoin space. And it's also because diet is just easy. It's easier to wrap your head around it. But again, the same principles apply. Like, the proof is that we are more sick and we have more chronic disease. That's not debatable in any facet. So yeah, if we were listening to the recommendations, which Bitcoiners have no problem, opposing like the dietary recommendations, and that's why they've embraced the carnivore seed oil movement, seed oil free movement. But then talking about things like the sun and more esoteric things that are kind of conceptually like harder to grasp for the average person, I think it does get lost in some degree, but I think a lot of people are resonating quite well with it. So I do think it's really important. And I think that we need to keep pushing the movement of cultural decentralization onwards. And that's why I love this stuff. That's why I wrote a book about the bridge between the two. And it's cool. You talk to these people who are starting to get into this stuff, into hunting and, homesteading, and that's why we started this podcast. So totally agree.
We need a revitalization, and you can look at history and you can look at societies rising and falling. You can look at cultures. You can look at moments of revitalization. Where we are today, the cultural engine has been co-opted by bureaucracy. And it has become non-dynamic and non-adaptive. So when we live in a society where we have these like tremendous mass communication channels, this mass media, we have the ability for one person to send a message to every human being on the planet. Now that can be in a really positive way, which is like probably what we're talking, like we're here broadcasting, right? Like I can do it, you can do it, anybody can do it. That's the internet. That's like a really positive version of this. And I would say the much more dangerous, maybe not inherently negative, depending on how you use it, but the much more risky version is like the kind of centralized, like mass media, cable news, like, where a very small, pool of influence can just dictate this very broad messaging. And so like, if culture flows downstream from movies, from media, from music, and those industries have become enormously centralized, that's changing, right? Like podcasts got big, and I think it is actually like quite literally decentralizing. I don't say that to like harp on the word decentralization. It just quite literally is what's happening. Podcast was decentralized, publishing. That's what it was.
Yeah, it's moving the needle back sort of in the direction because it's gone so far to the centralized direction.
And so like if culture flows downstream from that, then it's effectively bureaucracy that is setting culture. And you can look at this like everything's repeats, everything's remakes. Like, it's just Thor 2, Thor 3, Thor 4, Thor again, revamp, like the old Thor, new again. nothing's new, nothing's dynamic. And it's because the engine has just decayed. It's been completely all the the mitochondria ain't spinning, man. There's no ATP being generated. And so we need that revitalization. And it comes from the edges. It comes from the fringe.
No, I totally agree. I talk about this with my friends a lot. I think there's such a void of culture in this country, like right now. And I can see that, you know, the Bitcoin movement being, seen as like a cultural movement, because it's something, you know, we have all these principles that we share, the values are shared, and we want to empower people and move forward and progress in this direction, and that's a cultural movement. Whereas, you know, the average member of society, they're just going with the flow. They're just not consciously really living anymore. They're so devoid of life and purpose. You know, religion is a sense of purpose and culture, and I'm not arguing pro or against it, but that's, you know, a sense of culture in historical reason or historical, you know, context in many places, of course, and that's all gone. So there's really, and that's where you get all these social, I guess, like chaos that goes on, right? Like these, you know, just social, you know, arguments, virtue signaling, wokeness, all this is going on because people just don't really have any culture to pride themselves on. So they start talking about all this other shit that just doesn't really matter. And it's just a giant distraction, in my opinion.
Yeah, no. And I completely agree with what you said on religion. And I don't say this to contradict it, but just to push it a little further. I would even go as far to say that, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, like religion isn't gone because man must worship. I say that in a broad sense, in a non-theistic sense, but like religion is so inherent. Religion has been substituted. It has been substituted from the traditional religions to the media, the, you know, bureaucracy, to scientism, to all of these things. Like it's just the religious impulse in man has been redirected to an unsuitable container, something devoid of. Again, I don't say this in a like inherently non-materialist or materialist sense, but to something which lacks transcendence, which lacks transcendent virtue. There's nothing to aspire to there, whether you want to conceptualize that as something metaphysical or something just like the good, the true, the beautiful, the strong. But those notions have just been entirely broken down.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
No, totally. And I think it's kind of led to people not thinking really freely at all. They're just trusting the science and trusting the bureaucratic recommendations, and that's how we got into all this mess. But I guess, let's start to dive in. So you kind of said you were into this stuff beforehand, before you got into Bitcoin. So talk about that a little bit, how you discovered, you know, just health being important, and how that kind of evolved over maybe your young adult life.
Absolutely. So for me, and I think for most people, one only comes to health by knowing non-health, by knowing
losing it.
Yeah. Like nobody cares. Like a healthy person never thinks of health, right? It's like a fish thinking of water, right? Like the only reason anybody ever comes to health is they had some sort of issue. They had some sort of problem, something got disrupted. And that was certainly the case for me. I grew up, I was a vegetarian the first 18 years. I was super thin as a child.
You're raised vegetarian?
I was raised vegetarian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't eat meat like basically at all until I was 18.
Fish or anything, or no?
Well, okay. Dairy, like, so dairy.
Okay.
Like not meat. But still, it's like, you know, it gets skewed. It's a lot of just grains, a lot of carbs. Not that I mean, I eat carbs now, but it was very low in protein. But anyway, so, you know, I grew up in that way. I, you know, on the computer a ton as a kid, like video games, all that sort of stuff. So like, I didn't have like a solid physical baseline. Right. And so, just issues from that, migraines and just, not vitality. Right. And, through that and a few other things, like I kind of, when I was like 19, I kind of realized like, whoa, this is not working. Like I need to kind of figure this out. And that took me on a journey, right? Like you can't approach the health topic right now or 10 years ago without being, oh, it's veganism, you got to be vegan, you got to do juicing, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? Like, so I went down that rabbit hole, man. I tried all the things. I did yoga, I did that, I did weightlifting, I started eating meat. Made me feel, tremendously better. that was a revelation. And I eat meat for every meal now. And so I kind of went down that rabbit hole. And then walking I came to kind of very naturally. And like I started walking a little bit more. I wanted to get outside. I wanted to get off the computer. And I just felt good. It's very simple. It's an incredibly self-reinforcing habit. And that's what I tell people. It's not like trying to build up the discipline to go, deadlift twice a week and then chest day and then go for a run and then, climb a mountain like you fucking do. Like that takes a lot of like, not just discipline, but like prerequisites. Like most people don't have like joints that are stable enough.
Yeah.
But most people don't have joints which are even prepared enough. One thing, I actually got certified in this method called functional range conditioning along the way, which is now used by the NFL, the NBA, NASA. Incredible system for training and joint preparation. But most people's joints don't function for shit. And so like they're not even prepared to do that. So they go in the gym and they start working out and their back hurts and their knee has a problem and they just can't do it. Like there's a lot of baseline that has to be built up. But walking is, for 99% of people, is not like that. It's easy. It doesn't require a lot of discipline. And the thing is it just feels good and it reinforces itself. And you can walk for fucking 8 hours a day if you want to. You can't deadlift for 8 hours a day, right? Like if the thing we're trying to address is people being sedentary, like you can only go max effort weightlift for so long in a day. And then if you're going to go sit on the couch, well, there's an issue there. Like there's an optimization that isn't present. So I'm very pro walking because I think it's something anybody can do. Obviously later I came to know you're also getting the sun, which is probably a huge reason why you feel good when you're doing it. Like it's not going to be the same on a treadmill in a gym, but it gets you outside, it gets you in the sun, it gets you moving. It's incredibly self-reinforcing. And it's just the most effective way to limit the total hours you spend sitting. Like, gyms are not going to do that. And walking is essentially, your option there. So I got really into that. I did that. And so I've walked for, over a decade now, probably at first 3 or 4 miles a day. Now it's like 10 to 13 miles a day. Like I haven't missed a day in a decade, like more or less. Maybe I was really sick once, but like, apart from that, I've done this for basically a decade. It changed my life.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's really funny when you're like, I've been walking for a decade. It's like, people are like, yeah, no shit, me too. But no, it's actually like, yeah, it's pretty incredible. And I really like what you said, like, it's not that hard, right? Like, there's no prerequisites. Like, if you can walk, 100 meters, you could walk, 10 miles if you really wanted to. And it's important because I think there are so many issues with like the exercise culture that we have today. It's just go to the gym, just get it done, doesn't matter, 4 a.m., like find the time, which is good. It's like that mindset, sure, but it turns a lot of people off to it. They get in the gym, they have no idea what the hell to do. They don't have this ramp up of like, functional mobility or strength or length or anything that's required to actually do some of these complex movements. They just see guys on the internet who are taking steroids. And in reality, they don't even need to do like half those movements if they just like learn how to do some push-ups, some pull-ups, squats deeply and just walked. Like they'd probably cover like 90% of their bases. They wouldn't have to go to a gym. They could then do it maybe outside as well. Yep. And yeah, I think it's really interesting because yeah, so many of these functional movements we've, especially as adults, like, you know, we had them as children. If you look what kids do naturally, they run, they squat, they crawl, they climb, they're just running around in these deep positions. And then we just get rid of that. You know, we don't do that. You know, if you're an athlete, maybe you did some of these movements longer than others. But, you know, even myself, you know, as a college athlete, once I stopped playing, kind of, I had this multi-year gap where I had to regain and retrain so many of these functional movements, because it's crazy how you literally don't even realize that. Like, I played a sport every day, probably from like when I was 6 to 21. That's 15 years of moving functionally every single day. And then when I take 2-3 years off, and then I'm 25, 26, 27, I'm like, wow, like, I can't just go show up to a basketball court or a soccer field and just like play a game without really struggling and then feeling sore for like 3 days. Like, how did I do this all the time? Well, it's because I did it for 15 years straight with, you know, 1 or 2 off days a month max. And people take that for granted. So wanted to highlight that, but also the walking thing. So like, why is walking really important? Why is moving passively? So I think modern society, right, we try and fit exercise into like an hour because it's more convenient, and then we can do like everything else. But ancestrally, and why I've been thinking a lot about this, because I've gotten back into trail running and I really enjoy hiking. And it's like, ancestrally, we didn't move intensely for long periods of time. We moved very passively for long, like all day long. And that was like, our endurance was our best attribute for hunting. Yeah. And then of course there was some periods of intensity, but yeah. Have you thought about that as well? Like, how that makes sense?
100%. No, I couldn't agree more. You know, exercise in that modern sense of like, I'm going to carve out an hour of my day after my desk job to go to the gym. It's the junk food of movement. I mean, that's fucking junk food. Like, it's, and like, you know, it's sure, if it's that or nothing, sure, do it. Like, it's better than nothing. But, you know, when you think about it in terms of the human organism, and you think about it in terms of like organismically, evolutionarily, what is this? What am I? Like, you come to this conclusion that like it was constant movement. It was constant movement. Like, you did not sit down statically during the day. Like, it just didn't. Maybe if you needed a little rest because you'd been walking for 3 hours, or you went
or for meals, like, right,
for
like
meals, or, you know, whatever. Like, it's not like neurotic, but like, what the fuck were you going to do? You're just going to sit there on the forest floor, like, staring at your stomach for hours? There was no passive entertainment. There was no, like, you moved, you did stuff. And that's what your system is designed to do. And it goes to your point of like, you did this every day for 15 years and then you took 3 years off, and it's like, whoa, it's a completely different experience. Like, the body responds so well to consistency, right? Like, it requires, it's not something you can like biohack in many ways, like, depending on how you define that. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's you need to restructure. It's not about getting your discipline in a box and carving out an hour or two to do all the good. I'm gonna go work out. I'm gonna do an infrared sauna. I'm gonna go, like, you know, fucking pranayama, and like, cool, do that for 2 hours, back to the couch. Like, no, you need to just rip the fucking cord and restructure the way you live. It needs to be a lifestyle. And that's not me like advocating this like insanely intense, like, you know, Yako, like, Wilcox or whatever his name is, like, we're just gonna fucking weightlift all day. No, it's you need to engineer. Like, I work outside, I walk, I do my calls for my job while walking. Like, it needs to feel seamless. Because if you look at like hunter-gatherers and you look at our evolutionary history, they were just living their life. They weren't thinking about these notions of exercise and like, it was just it was in service of something. It was in service of survival. It was in service of protection, of community. There was a purpose. And I just don't believe that humans can like easily psychologically sustain the level of consistency that is required if it's just like a discipline practice. Like, sure, some rare few people with insanely strong discipline muscles can, but that's not a solution for everybody. Like, you need to just rebuild. You got to rebuild your lifestyle from the ground up. But here's the positive for people listening, that it sounds like I'm like saying like, yeah, just fix fucking everything, bro. Just completely tear your whole life out and like rebuild who you are. Here's the positive. Here's why it's doable. And it's not this like, you know, insane, like Herculean feat. It's because every single step of the way, if you do the right things, you feel better now. It feels good now. You want to keep doing it because you feel good. And this is a thing I get into with some like healthy habits. And like when people sometimes be like, oh, it's so hard to maintain these health habits. And it's like, well, do you feel good when you do it? Like, no, I actually feel like shit when I juice 10 pounds of kale and drink it. Yeah, maybe because that's not fucking good for you, man. And that's why you don't feel good. Like everything I do, I literally feel better today immediately for doing it. And so I want to do it more. You have a like innate reward system in your body that's like, ooh, son, I'm going to generate natural opioids. Feels good, man. I want more.
Yeah, I mean, like I have a pretty You hear me now? Yeah, I was on mute for a sec. I have a pretty regimented life to probably the outsider, but to me it's like, it's so easy because the things I do, they make me feel so good. And actually the things like when I don't feel good is when I can't do those things as much. And when I do have to travel or be on, you know, meetings more or screens more and, you know, doing the traditional work. And like, I know those are the things that are bringing me down. Whereas if I'm outside all day, walking, moving, hiking, working out, swimming, whatever, I mean, that's like the best day in the world for me. And it's like, that's not even, negotiable. The food I eat, you know, it's just, you know, real food and it tastes great and it makes me feel good. Like it's really simple. But I think for the average person, there's usually some sort of threshold where they just, you know, they can't give up their corporate job or that's in the office, or they can't give up their social scene on the weekends, instead, you know, going for, you know, long walks on the beach or hikes in nature. So I think there's a lot of apprehension from that. So it's just people need to realize that they don't have to change everything at once as well. You know, like you're saying, kind of build up to it, you know, go for a daily lunchtime walk. Everyone, at least you have time in the morning, you have time during your lunch break, and you have time after work. Like you have time to just go outside and walk and whatnot. You just need to, you know, make more time.
100%. No, you don't have to change it all at once. I mean, for me, this was a decade-long process, right? Like I didn't start here. Like, you know, I probably took like 2 walks a day in the beginning. I walk at least a mile every hour while the sun is up. Like I have the receipts to prove it. Like I just walk. It's just my lifestyle. Like but I didn't start there. I didn't start there at all. Start with 2 walks a day. Start with getting a little sun in the morning, sun in the evening, you know, 10-minute lunch break. Like you don't have to do it all at once, but you want to move in the direction of a lifestyle. And yeah, I get it. The job thing's hard. I have empathy and sympathy for people that their family's relying on them to earn a certain amount of money and they've been in a certain career and, you know, they're making good money, or maybe they're not making so good money, but they don't have any other options. And I feel that yeah, man, you don't burn the bridges, like, but start planning, start thinking, do what you can given your circumstances. And I mean, really all you need is a remote job. So at this point in society, so just take the steps. Maybe it takes you a year, maybe it takes you 2 years to get in that position where you can have a remote job and you can build a workstation outside and you can have a different flow to your lifestyle. But you can do that. Like, not everybody, and, unfortunately, right? Like, until I don't know if we ever will, like, don't have night shift jobs and don't have like certain stuff that needs to happen. But like, we don't have to rebuild society here. We're talking to individuals. You as an individual, can make this choice and just move towards it. It's one step at a time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, it's a journey, not a destination. And like, the good news is that like the more you do, the more energy you will have to do. It's incredibly self-reinforcing.
Yeah, and this low time preference, right? In a nutshell, and yeah, obviously we're going to talk about Bitcoin and macro stuff. That'll help you out, right? So, plan for, 3 to 5 years where you want to be. What do you want to achieve? Like, look yourself in the mirror, that's who do you want to become, and just work towards that every day. I think that's more important than setting like, these individual goals that you're just going to hit, and then you hit them and it's like, okay, now what? But really, what's the long-term vision you have? So I think all that's, yeah.
Yeah. And further, it's like, the sorts of capabilities and the qualities which are both asked of and strengthened in the process of doing this, are thinking for yourself, reordering your life, gaining autonomy, learning on new topics that are not being spoon-fed to you. These are skills and tendencies that not only will strengthen you as like a whole person, but ultimately I believe and have found will actually make you like way more capable in the workplace and in your professional life. So there's a way that these things synergize. Also, just having your fucking brain work better, having your energy levels better, you're going to perform better. So even by doing this, your professional opportunities broaden. Like, you can go into a different industry. You can learn new things. I'm an avid generalist. I believe very wholeheartedly in being a generalist. I think there's a great quote, specialization is for insects. Like, we're not meant to just be these like narrow specialists that only know one thing. That's not a way to live a life. You can learn new things. You can pivot. You can go into different fields. You can rebuild yourself. You can remake yourself. I mean, even the notion of yourself is a constantly changing contextual thing. We're not these static people. You're not fixed.
Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, Tristan, 10 for 10% off your first order.
Wow. That is so many great points right there. So for sure, I just lose my mind when I just can't comprehend, especially I have friends, they're just traditional, like degenerates but they're really high functioning degenerates who just, startups, whatever, finance, and they're taking Adderall, doing a lot of coke. And I'm just like, guys, like you could just be healthier and be more productive and your performance will be a lot higher. And they're like, no, we're just grind now and we'll chill later, right? When we get the bag and all this stuff. And to me, it's just insane because, I have such like a regimented lifestyle to the average person, but like I'm doing so many different things and I'm super big. I mean, I've been like, being well-rounded has been my strong suit for like my entire life. Actually, like that was like the high school, who's who that I won. And to this day, I still don't even know what's like the topic I know the most about. And it's cool talking to someone like you as well. Like, obviously really knowledgeable about the financial, the macro markets, Bitcoin, but here we are talking about health, mindset, exercise, ancestral living, and sunlight. And that's what decentralization, I think, is all about. Obviously there's certain skills that like, electrician, carpentry, sure, things that you're never going to really have that trade level knowledge. I mean, you can have the, fundamentals, but that could be shared within your community. But the things that are most important, and I got out of college and I was like, I wrote a book on health and wealth theoretically, because I was like, well, these are like the two most important things to learn about. Why would you not want to know more about these topics? Because that's foundationally how you're going to have a more, successful life in my opinion. And I just, to me, it's a mystery why that mindset's not shared. I know there are a lot of high performing people who do, are getting more and more into health. And I like seeing this trend. I think obviously there's a lot of misinformation out there, but foundationally you can do so many, like I'm doing so many different things right now. And it's because I'm performing high because of my health.
Absolutely. No, it plays into everything. Like people don't even really know what it's like to have good energy levels. Like I can go constantly. I can focus constantly. I can eat a giant bowl of carbs and I don't feel tired after, and I don't crash from caffeine. Like none of this stuff happens to me. And it's not that that wasn't always the case. It's not that I'm just like genetically blessed or something, right? Like even that concept, like genes are flux, like genes change, like, the light controls half of your genes have a circadian, measure, like they're controlled by light. So even like the very notion of like this fixed genetic thing isn't true, but it wasn't just that it was inherent to me. It happened over time. I used to, get tired. I used to have those things happen. I just don't anymore. People don't even know what it's like to have good energy, good focus, good, cognition. Like they're operating at such a deficit, and then they're reaching for crutches because, well, they recognize that something isn't working right. And that's a true recognition. Like your buddies that are taking Adderall and stuff to work, they do recognize something true about themselves. And it's that like their cognition and focus and energy isn't that great. And so they just have the wrong solution, or at least, what I would say is the wrong solution.
They're very aware, and they're not shy about it either. That's why I respect them. They're not playing like victim mentality, which I think a lot of most people do. It's just easier, right? It's easier to drink more coffee or take a pill and change your whole lifestyle, but you're just putting a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid. And it's like, for me, the crutches, like even coffee, like I feel like a lot of health influencers, I'm like, you really want to know how you feel? Like, raw dog life for like a month, like no coffee, no stimulants, no supplements, and you will find out what your vitality is truly like. You will find out the status of your mitochondria and how your energy production is going, and then you can try and build up from there. And once you're feeling better, then add these things back into your life. That's what I did for like 3 years, and now I still don't really drink coffee, but I'm considering doing it like once a week or something to really like be more productive, because it can be a tool, and you want to do a lot of things, but that, I think that could be powerful, is just raw dog it, and you'll find out how resilient you actually are, and how vital your baseline is.
So that's so in some ways it reminds me of like, you don't want to cover up your weaknesses. A parallel I'd give on this is like, say you're deadlifting, right? You want to be a good deadlifter. You want to deadlift 500 pounds. So you start training deadlifting. You get up to 300, and you start having some knee stuff. You start having some back stuff. You start like whatever. It's minor stuff. Like it's not a big deal. Normally you just kind of focus on it, kind of train it up. No big deal. Instead, what you do is you inject a steroid into the muscle. You no longer feel it. You just keep going. What happens in a year or two? You have a back injury, you have a knee injury, because you covered up the sensation, the pain signal, the evidence of weakness, the evidence of something not working right. You said, ooh, something's not working right. Let me just paper it over so I don't have to like experience the discomfort. And then you get like a much bigger problem down the road. And so like very much agree with you there. Like if you're using, you're using coffee, you're using whatever it is, and you're just like kind of covering up, pushing past, like obscuring these things, like that's to your detriment. Like you need to take a look at like what's really going on in your system. That being said, I drink a half cup of coffee in the morning. Why? Well, because it's pleasurable. Like it's not even like a performance thing. Like I like coffee. Like it feels good. It's one of life's pleasures. I don't really do much else. I don't do any drugs. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I drink zero alcohol. I like coffee. But that's a choice. You had a tweet that was similar to this. It was like some dude, AirPods, and you were like, once you know, you can just choose. Like you need to have the knowledge to choose. And And that's the thing, like if you're just like blindly covering everything up, that's bad. But if you're in a good state and like you know what you're doing, you know what you want to work on, like you can make a conscious choice that, hey, I enjoy this thing, I'm gonna consume this thing. And yeah,
it's your life. At the end of the day, we want you to be empowered, but we want you to have the education to, make the right decision in your context, right? The right decision is just like for you. It's not for anyone else. So
correct.
Can't tell you how to live, but it's obvious that so many people are, they're not honest with themselves. They're not aware fundamentally of, the impacts and detriments of all these things, all these modalities. So yeah, once you're empowered through education, you can do whatever the hell you want. I don't really care. And I agree with you. And I love, coffee is definitely a pleasure of life. And there are other things, that, I gave up for a period of time. And now that I'm, have my health fully back and very resilient, I'm like thinking about, introducing them back into my life. But that's the brilliance of it, and you are your own individual when you have that. So you have more flexibility and that's what it's all about. But I kind of want to pivot. If you want to add more.
And like, there literally is no right answer. It's not that like, oh yeah, you can choose to do this like kind of suboptimal thing because you're resilient. No, like there literally is no right answer. Like people's bodies are so variable. Like I'm highly carb tolerant. Like I'm a tall guy. I was always lean. Like if I'm going to build mass, like I can pound carbs, like no detriment. Other people, like that's just not their system. And like, I think we can do things to make ourselves more resilient, but like that works for me. That might not work for someone else. Some people are really sensitive to caffeine. Some people aren't. Some people are allergic to fucking mangoes. Like biology is like incredibly varied. And there really is no right answer. Sure, there's some basics, there's some basic fundamentals. Like, no one's adapted to live in a dark cave staring at a computer screen, but like within, like if you don't have these like edge cases, you ultimately like need to learn the basics and then figure out what's true for you. Nobody else can tell you that. Nobody else knows what works for you on a really fine-tuned level. So it's not just that like, you can afford to do a few suboptimal things. It's that like you literally need to discover what works for your system and what doesn't.
Yeah, it's all context, right? And it's like you're in Florida, you're in the sun all the time, walking, 10 hours a day. You have sun all year round. So yeah, like you should have no problem with carbs too. Plus like your background and everything. And, we're like younger, active males. Should we be listening to Mark Hyman and Joe Mercola? They're 60 just trying to like live longer and just got into like weightlifting and stuff. No, I don't need to listen to them. There's bits and pieces of information that they say that might be helpful for me to understand, but I'm not just going to follow what they do. It just doesn't make any sense. They're 60, I'm 27. So in the context is everything. So that's what I think. Don't get lost in that. Your situation is totally unique. So that's a very important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. But I kind of want to get more into the sun stuff. So it's like, what is your? No, this has been great. Say I'm Joe Schmo wearing sunglasses, living in New York City in a high rise, 20th floor. Just staring at screens all day. How do you convince the average normie or a Bitcoiner, I guess? So they're not just normies. They're at least advanced to the Bitcoiner stage. So good on them. How do you convince the average Bitcoiner that sunlight matters? It's not toxic, and how it's helped you become a more optimal human?
Every single cell, every organ, every system, your endocrine axis, your neurotransmitters, your body's cycles of repair and rebuild and protection, everything is circadian linked. What it means to be circadian linked, it means our biology and all biology on this planet evolved in a light dark cycle. There are countless animal and plant examples of things which literally do not function if you break that cycle. Like plants that don't flower, animal processes that don't happen, reproductive processes. Every single organism on this planet is linked to the day and night cycle. We don't really need to answer why that is. It's an interesting question. There's plenty of stuff to look into. All that matters is that it is. And your body has designed its systems around those cycles. The signal, very obviously, is light itself. Now, light is not just light. It's not like 0 to 5,000, right? And it's like, oh, 5,000 is really bright and 0 is, and it's just like a single variable that like goes, right? Light is made up of many different spectrums of light, all with different qualities, many of which we probably don't understand very well at all, many sub-qualities and sub-spectrums. Light is quite literally a spectrum. It is a continuous spectrum from ultraviolet through infrared and beyond, but we'll stick to ultraviolet to infrared. So sunlight, UVA, UVB, also UVC, not really as critical in circadian pathways, visible light through all the colors, you know, blue, orange, yellow, green, red, all these colors. And then red, near infrared, infrared. And all of those components have different biological impacts. Light is insanely bioactive. If you don't believe me, go sit in a perfectly dark room for 48 hours. You will lose your goddamn mind. Like, if you, like, this is so simple. Just think about how you would feel. Just think about how you would feel in total darkness for 48 hours, right? Like, light is bioactive. It's not just like your psychology reacting to something you don't like. It's that your system goes goddamn haywire. And so light isn't just this single variable. It's all of these spectra. It's all of these different components. Each of them has its own impact on our biology. Blue light functions very differently than red light. UVB very differently than UVA. Infrared very differently from red. And you can't reduce it. Something I post about a lot is that in modern science, like, the epistemology is that, like, knowledge is achieved by reduction, meaning we like reduce everything to its like most component bits. But if you do that all the way, the only thing which exists are like elementary particles. And what does that tell you about anything? That tells you nothing about anything. Like, knowing that I'm made up of neutrons and protons and electrons and quarks doesn't tell you how my heart works, doesn't tell you how my circadian, like, it tells you shit about fuck. And so there's a way in which reduction can, sure, it can like teach us stuff, but it can also blind us to things, because knowledge can sometimes only happen on the level of the whole, on the level of the gestalt. And so I take that approach with sunlight. Like, we can go round and round and I can make an argument for why every individual spectrum is unique and why your fucking light bulb doesn't mimic it. Or we can just say sunlight is different than artificial light categorically. You can't substitute it. It's a whole, it's a gestalt. And your entire system is yoked to it. It's bound to it. It is, and you need it in your eyes. You need it on your skin. Some spectrums penetrate your body. They hit the inside of your body. One of the things I love to throw out there for people is infrared light will penetrate you like 6 inches, and it will literally strike the water in your mitochondria, which are the energy centers, and it will make that water less viscous. So if you imagine there's literally a rotary motor in a mitochondria, it spins. Imagine a rotary motor spinning through mud versus spinning through clear water. It's able to spin a lot more efficiently through clear water. And that is what infrared light striking your body in kind of a parallel does. And so this is so much more than a vitamin D story. Everyone knows vitamin D, and it's been insanely co-opted because they think you can just take a pill. You can't just take a pill. It's not the same thing. There's a whole pathway and submetabolites and metabolites, and everyone knows vitamin D. Yeah, vitamin D matters. Get your vitamin D. Get that UVB on your skin. Develop a nice tan. Look good. Feel good. but it's so much more. It's light in the eyes. It's internal light sensors in the brain. It's your body's, like, it's such a complex story. And so I'll close with, I will go as far to say, and like, there's no meta-analysis of this. I'm not basing this off a study. Like, you can't do this thing. But I personally would say that light is probably more important than diet. I think it is probably a bit more diet matters. If you if you don't eat any food, you'll starve to death. You'll be completely depleted in nutrients. But if you had to ask me to pick between eating McDonald's every day and never going outside, or going outside in some sort of weird bubble where I can still live my life, but the light never hits me, I'm picking the light. I'll eat McDonald's if I can have a good light environment. So again, it's hard to compare those things, but I truly believe that's the case.
Wow. That's a bold statement right there. I actually have never thought about that, because those both sound horrible, to be honest.
Yeah. It's like
McDonald's actually, hey, McDonald's, what do I have to? Do I have to eat everything, or could I just get some patties and the lettuce and I'll eat some fake cheese, I guess, instead of the fries. But no, that's a good point. I mean, seriously, well, you just said a lot of great things, right? And I do want to keep it maybe high-ish level. I mean, we could dive into some rabbit holes, but at first, the way I think about it is light is it's like the main input signal to our biology. Just straight up. So if you block that input signal, your body is not going to have the most optimal, responses. There's going to be things that are affected downstream. Like you mentioned, circadian biology. Your circadian rhythm is your biological clock that dictates, all the fluctuations that happen in your body on a 24-hour basis. And, that includes what most people are familiar with is melatonin, cortisol, wakefulness, restfulness. These are the two, most conceptually understood maybe components of that, because people they're aware of it, and people always harp on how bad cortisol is, even though that's literally what gives you energy in the morning, provides wakefulness, and that's stimulated by morning light, by blue light. But so that's important, I think. And melatonin, of course, that's why, bright lights at night are bad. You don't want to suppress melatonin production, blue light. But in general, that's input signal from full spectrum sunlight. So keeping it high level, what does full spectrum sunlight look like? And in the morning, it's red, near infrared, heavy with some blue. And then throughout the day, you get more spectrums. You get UVA, and then you get UVB. And then those go away again, and then it's just blue, red, near infrared, and then it's just red and near infrared, and then the sun sets. And then there's no light from nature besides the moon, maybe. And that's pretty, low in intensity, of course.
It's half a lux. I've measured it.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because that I've never measured it, but that, that's nothing. That's literally a dark room. And even though our eyes are so photoreceptor sensitive, they can pick out one photon in
exactly.
one drop of water in a swimming pool. It's absurd. And so
real quick, so the reason I did this is because one night it was a full moon, and I was like,
it was a full moon. That was my next question. If it was,
it's so bright. Well, it's a little bit higher on a full moon, but it was so bright out here, because I think about light at night. I'm like, what if there was some cyclical light at night during the full moon there? Because it's kind of blue too. It's a little blue. But I went and measured it. It was 1 lux on the full moon, half a lux if it's not a full moon. So most people don't even understand what a light that low looks like. I use very, very dim lights in my house at night, red spectrum only, very, very dim. I'll use 3 lux, and people can't even function sometimes. But this is half a lux or 1 lux, so it's there. It's minute.
Yeah. So lux, if you're not familiar, is just the measure of brightness, also denominated sometimes in lumens, right? So it's the average room during the day or outside brightness is like tens of thousands of lux or lumens. And then at night, it should be, you know, a lot less, maybe in the hundreds, low thousands, still when the sun is up. But if you turn on lights in a room, it'll be like hundreds of lux. So we're talking about, you know, hundreds of fold of magnitude compared to like the moon. So basically it's nothing. It's dark. So what does that mean? That means anything that you do that's outside of this natural spectrum of light that's available, that would be available to us, and that before 1860 or 1870s did not exist in other than the forms of fire and, you know, candlelight, which are also very low lux, low brightness, and majority like red, infrared. They just wouldn't have existed. So you're altering your biological response to light with these external artificial stimuli.
Absolutely. You're completely hijacking it. And it affects everything. It affects mental health. It affects insulin production. It affects weight gain. It affects dopamine, eye health. Like, it's just, it's not benign. You can't escape it. Your system doesn't know how to deal with the constant light environment, and certainly not in these like skewed spectrums. And, you know, it's talking about light at night is often more complicated than talking about sun. I think sun is even easier to get, like, just go outside and you'll get a lot from that. But getting people to restructure their light environment at night is a challenging one.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably the hardest part. And depending on the time of year or where you live, I mean, right now for me, it's actually pretty easy. And you know, what do you do in your house and blah, blah, blah. Well, actually in the summer right now in Wyoming, I mean, it's light out to like 9:30. I don't turn any lights on, like in my house during the day. There's enough light from the sun, and I open all the windows. So that's something you can do if you're inside. Open all the windows, and maybe we could talk about glass as well a little bit. But at night, and then I just go to bed. But, you know, what do you do in winter in Florida, for example? Like, you just have red light bulbs, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I have red light bulbs and, you know, red light filters on every screen. And, like, you know, maybe the sun, you know, in winter, maybe it's setting at 7:30. It's still not too bad compared to some places. But, you know, I have a light meter, and so I've measured all those light bulbs. I keep them around 3 lux, which from what I've read is like the sweet spot. Like, even if it's red, if it's too bright, it can disrupt stuff. Like, you don't want a super bright red light. But I have basically like 3 lux red lights, and so I'll use those at night. And yeah, maybe I'll watch a show, or I'll read a book, or I'll do whatever. Like, you know, is it like perfection? No, it's not perfection. Does it really matter that much? Like, no. Like, the difference between what I do and just having lights on at night, and the difference between what I do and just like total darkness at night is, I mean, like orders of magnitude on that side and very small on this side. So, you know, and especially for people that are adapting to this, like, yeah, like, I'm not asking you to just sit in the dark once the sun goes down, you know, because like one of the things that we had evolutionarily is that's not what people did. You had a fire, first of all, so that's a level of light, that's a level of red light, so it's pretty consistent. But you were around other people, you talked, you told stories, right? Like, we're all like kind of living in these houses, right? So I get it. Like, you want something to do, you don't just want to sit there. That's fine. Get some very dim red lights and run those at night, and that's the place to start.
Yeah, I think, again, with all these modalities, it's like, just strive for some sort of improvement. Like, perfection is not the end goal. It's actually impossible. So, like, forget about it. It's literally impossible to achieve perfection, especially in a light environment. You know, it's impossible in many facets of like optimizing health. So it shouldn't be the end goal. It should just be, you know, how can I make some improvements? And, you know, the screen filtering is a big one. And I've been doing this for like 4 years. And I think it's like the easiest thing to do. You could just look it up, like, in your settings. These people have, like, I've had some triple click setting now that it just automatically goes. I personally just keep my screens like red or orange all day, because then I don't have to really like change them back and forth. I mean, maybe at like after the sunset, super dark red, or in the morning, like super dark red. Or I just wear blue light blocking glasses, and then I don't even have to worry about changing it from like orange to red. And yeah, they look weird. Screens are red, orange, and people will be like, oh, what's that about? And then, hey, I mean, you could tell them. And people are pretty aware of blue light being bad for them. They think it's a scam, or they're like, yeah, my glasses are like blue light blocking, and you look at them, they're like clear lenses. Yeah. Those are doing absolutely nothing, but I guess they've heard of it. So yeah, there's a lot of small things you can do. And again, a lot of these things, I mean, yeah, blue light blocking glasses cost, maybe $70 to $90 for a decent pair, a cheaper pair, maybe less. But a lot of these things don't cost anything, or, you could be saving money. You're turning the lights off more and, all this. So it's pretty easy from, I think, an entry. There's no requirements, and I think that can make a big difference. So that's a night. Morning, what is Steven doing every morning in terms of light and sun?
So I just wake up, and pretty much first thing, I just go out in my yard, and I'll spend, kind of an hour, either walking around or sitting if I'm, waking up slower, but just, I'm in just like shorts and nothing else, and just getting the sun on my skin, sun in my eyes, just like, that's how I start my day. And it's incredible, man. Like, within 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like the most incredible sense of wakefulness and energy, and like your whole system just comes alive. It's better than coffee. Like, I won't even drink coffee for like 2 hours. Like, it's not like a wake up thing for me. I'll be fully awake, fully alert from the sun, and then I drink it because I enjoy it. But it's like, you completely come alive. That morning sun's probably the most important, right? That's probably the most important. Like, get out there, see it, wake up that way. It's critical. Anybody can do it, because you can do it before work. Like, I know for like young parents that work and have to drive their kids to school really early in the morning, I hear you. That's complicated. I'm sure you'll figure it out, and your kids won't be that young forever. But
just put the windows down when you're driving. It's Florida. It's it's not that cold.
Yeah, something. You'll figure it out. I mean, get 15 minutes. Do whatever it is. I mean, your kids need it too. Not to lecture you, but like, they're developing, so maybe try. I know it's hard, but yeah. I mean, that morning sun is just critical, and then it's. I mean, I'm outside all day, man. And you adapt, right? Like, I'm in Florida. I'm Fitzpatrick type 2 skin. Like, I'm in a high UV environment. Like, I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and I'm typically very pale. I'm tan now. Like, you adapt. It's gradual. It takes time. You do it over time. But start that process, and it goes without saying, but I'll say it because I'm not telling you to go get a sunburn. Like, yeah, sunburns are bad. Like, they do increase your risk for skin cancer. If you're just going and getting a peeling sunburn, every day, like, come on. That's not good. It feels like shit. Like, the sun feels good, but stop before it feels bad. It's so simple. Like, sunburns feel bad. Sun feels good. Drinking water feels good. If you drink too much water, it feels bad. Like, same sort of thing, right? Like, there's such a thing as too much. Like, I'm not disagreeing with the literature about getting sunburns constantly, increasing certain risks. That's damage. But you build it up. Build up a tolerance. Go out in the sun. Stop before you burn. Repeat.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask next, is kind of like building up that solar callus. But the morning sun is for sure. I think everyone.
Fine. Yeah, morning sun's fine. You're not going to burn in the morning.
Yeah, no. But I think that being like, if you had to choose, like, if you have like 20 minutes, let's say that's all you have, like, go outside first thing in the morning, because that's just going to set off like, all the downstream biological processes that need to happen. And yeah, if you need to drive to work, if you need to drive to your kids to school, like, put your windows down. Like, there are things you can do that you don't even realize. Like, any sort of indirect photons like on your eye. So as well, something that is important is naked eye, right? Like, so if you're driving, you might need to wear like glasses or contacts. But when you go outside first thing in the morning during sunrise, like really it should be with nothing
correct
interfering with your eye. And yeah, obviously if you can spend more time outside, it would be great to get like a little bit. So anything is better than nothing, but it'd be great to get a little bit of each, you know, spectrum when it's changing. So like right in the morning, you're getting kind of just the basic red, infrared, and some blue, but then the UVA and B comes later. So it'd be great to get, you know, more of this, because obviously you need UVB to produce vitamin D, and you know the benefits of that, most of the listeners. But again, try and get anything more than nothing. But if you are trying to build your solar callus, what have you found that worked well for you, I guess, when you first like moved to Florida to, you know, not get sunburn? Were you kind of just easing into it? Were you just doing more morning and nighttime? Or yeah, how do you gauge that? I know it is simple, but sometimes I'm just like doing stuff and I'll get a little red, not like a bad sunburn, but I'm just like playing a sport, I'm hiking, or I'm like, yeah, I'm outside. So what are some things people can do to avoid getting really sunburned when they're outside?
Yeah, so I think morning sunlight's most important, like you said. Just if you're going to do something, just get that morning sunlight, get it everywhere. That's the single most important thing you can do if you're only going to do one thing. But basically, so you want the morning sunlight because it prepares your skin to tan properly and respond. And this is just, it's mostly in the eyes. So it is like the UVA and like the red on the skin, but it's mostly your eyes seeing the UVA. So what you said about no contacts, no glasses. I talk to people all the time that have really poor vision, like really, really bad vision. And so it's complicated for them. And I tell them like, look, midday, you can wear glasses. Like, it's not ideal, but it's less critical. What's happening midday, it's more about the brightness, the visible light, rather than the UV specifically. But in the morning, you need that UV hitting your cornea, and that will be blocked by the glasses. So if you have really poor vision, plop a chair down in your yard and just fucking sit there for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And if you can't see, you can't see. Like, it's okay. Don't, operate heavy machinery. But you got to do that in the morning. It's going to prepare your system to tan, to have an appropriate melanin response to UVB, and to also, like, you'll get less damage. Like, it actually, like, one of the reasons a lot of these studies are very limited is because there's no control for circadian rhythm, the whole spectrum of sunlight. Half the time, they're just using isolated UV light with no other spectrum, which doesn't exist in nature. So it's a process, right? But so that early morning, and then you want to go out like noon, 1, 2, but stop before you burn. And even like, you're going to get a little pink in the beginning, and that's fine. Like, it goes away the next day. There's no pain, there's no peeling. It's maybe like a little pink. It goes away in a few hours or the next day or something. That's going to be normal in the beginning, not a big deal. Ideally, you get like, that doesn't happen to me anymore. And like, it's more complicated. Like, you're in an environment where like there isn't sun all the time. So like you're losing your tan in the winter and then you're rebuilding it. So you're always in this like kind of rebuilding phase but if you're in a more constant light environment, UV environment, like for me, that doesn't happen anymore, even if I'm out like a lot. So like ideally you get to a point where that doesn't happen. I don't think it's really a big deal if it does, but you want to get to a point where you're not like pink all over. Like you're maybe a little pink here on your chest or like the top of your shoulder, right? Like these kind of like you get a little pink there, a little pink here. It goes away the next day, no big deal. But you got to go out kind of midday to get that UV exposure, and that's what's really going to start building the tolerance. But it's consistency. So one of the other things that skews the research, intermittent sun exposure is much more risky than consistent sun exposure. So what this is like they have people that like maybe they qualify in the high sun exposure group, but like imagine it's like you work a 9 to 5 and then you're outside all day Saturday and Sunday. But Monday through Friday, you're just constantly indoors, no sun exposure. That would be intermittent sun exposure. So that is much riskier in terms of what negatives exist than consistent sun exposure. You want to strive for consistency, not like you do it one day on the weekend, you get a lot of sun and then you stay indoors. So that's, as much when you're building that callus, you're building that tan, just in general health, you want to get to a place where you are giving your skin and your body these consistent inputs.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important is the consistency from a daily perspective, not just like an hourly, I was outside from, on Saturday for like 8 hours. So that's when you're going to get fried like a lobster and not realize it. But yeah, in general, use common sense, but really think about how much you've been exposed to the sun already. And use that gauge. If, it took 10-15 minutes of midday sun exposure and you got a little pink, then it's like, okay, I probably shouldn't just stand out there for 50 minutes. Maybe I just do like 5 minutes more the next day. And then like you slowly build, it's progressive overload. Like progressive overload is everything in life. And I think that's important, but you touch upon a lot of, good points on why the research is flawed. And I think the biggest, argument we get in on Twitter, and the biggest, thing that the naysayers point to is all this research of skin cancer. And, skin cancer has been shown to be, directly caused by UV sun exposure. And you mentioned a couple good points already that, these are done in isolation. They're not considering, the factors of, lifestyle habits and, intermittent versus consistent sun exposure. Is there anything else you point to there? Like, how would you design an experiment to show ideally that sun is not detrimental to health and does not cause skin cancer? Maybe could exacerbate it or whatever, but is not like the driving cause when done properly.
Yeah. So the way I would do it, the right study, which is almost impossible to do. When people don't realize, the people that don't spend a lot of time thinking about designing scientific experiments don't realize that there's just so much you can't do. So this is the right study. I'm not optimistic it'll ever happen. You get 10,000 people and 10,000, like you get 20,000 people. 10,000 of those people live a completely circadian lifestyle. So they avoid light at night. They're out in the sun all day. They're in the morning. They get it directly. They do the whole thing for 30 years. And then another 10,000 people live indoors or whatever, or just live a kind of normal, they live a normal lifestyle, right? That's really kind of the only way. You can maybe get around that if you had we identified this random village on one of these Greek islands where everyone's already doing that anyways. But you need a longitudinal study of people that soup to nuts are living the whole way, because artificial light at night disrupts your circadian rhythm, which disrupts this, it's called an S-phase cycle. Your skin has a rhythm. There's a time where it repairs and there's a time where it protects. And if your skin's in the repair phase as UV is hitting it, it can sustain damage, right? But it's because your skin thinks it's nighttime, but it's daytime, right? So you can't. So first of all, most of these studies are not really the cellular studies and the clinical studies they're not done on sunlight. They're done on UV light from a laser or a bulb. It's already vastly different. The ones that are actually done on sunlight are meta-analysis of they're population studies. They're we're going to look at Australia, which is higher UV, and we're going to compare it to Europe. And they find that Australia has higher skin cancer. Now, people conclude that, it's because the sunlight, UV. What's another explanation for why that might be the case? Well, we know for a fact, right? Like, I don't deny this, that getting sunburns will increase your melanoma risk. If you have a bunch of white people in Australia that are living modern lifestyles in a very high UV environment, what's the chance they get more sunburns than people in Europe? Probably really goddamn high. So you're not actually separating sunburns from appropriate, consistent sun exposure there. So they're not doing like clinical studies with actual sunlight. They're doing it with UV light, and the population studies are like ridiculously confounded. And you can find studies that say the opposite, right? Like I can find a million studies that say outdoor workers have lower rates of melanoma than indoor workers. I can find conflicting studies on basal cell, squamous cell. There's probably some increase, but that's like 99.99% survival rate. It's just like a little patch. You get it rubbed off when you're 60. It's just not a big deal relative to the benefits. Like there's probably something there. The melanoma link is incredibly weak in many ways. It's like office workers get it at the highest rates. It's skyrocketing everywhere. People are avoiding the sun, and melanoma rates are increasing 5% a year. So like melanoma, no. Basal cell, highly inconclusive. Squamous cell, yeah, maybe, but it like you gotta weigh the trade-offs, man. Like it's highest sun exposure groups, like 60% less chance of breast cancer, like 45% less chance of pancreatic cancer, of colon cancer, stomach cancer, brain cancer. Like, what do you want? The really bad shit that'll fucking kill you? Or when you're 65, you go to the dermatologist once a year and they use a freeze spray on a little freckle. Like, come on. Like, they're not the same. Like, one of them will completely fuck up your entire life. The other is like, when you're old, you might go get like a spot frozen off.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really overlooked as well. I mean, for sure, epidemiological studies, which if you're not familiar with, are basically like surveys of populations that they group together, and there's almost no way for them to control on all the independent variables and independent factors, and they say they do for some things. But in reality, like in order for those to be like actually clinically relevant, the risk profile needs to be so high that it's undeniable. So like smoking cigarettes causing lung cancer is like an 11 to 20-fold increase of risk. So it's like it needs to be that high to be like clinically relevant. Like, you know, I wrote all about like meat increasing cancer. It was like a 12% increase, which is a joke.
From
and that's
the
a
starting point.
Relative. That's a relative risk.
Relative.
Yeah. So the absolute risk increase, I did the math in the book. It was like going from like 4.3% to like 4.5%. So it's actually like a total joke. So it's the same thing. Like there's a huge problem with epidemiological studies that the average person doesn't realize. And those are usually what's, you know, referenced in a lot of these, you know, headlines or dermatologist recommendations. So in reality, there are no good studies of populations unless they went and did some on like hunter-gatherers and things like that. But again, skin cancer prevalence at a societal level is only, you know, up and to the right. So whatever we're doing now is not working. So I think that's an important thing to realize. But in general, if you're smart about your sun exposure, there should be no risk. And no one wants to get sunburn, and, you know, cumulative sunburns are, you know, wrinkle and age your skin faster anyway. But yeah, the point about the cancers.
I'm looking this up, man. I just looked up these numbers. So like Europe versus Australia, and so Australia has like highest rates, right? It's a difference of like 20 cases in Europe per 100,000 people to 36 cases per 100,000 people. So like, yeah, it's higher, but we're talking about.
But that absolute risk increase is really not that high at all. It's all relative.
Yeah, let me just do that math real quick. Let me pull up a calculator.
But again, the point on Australia why you do that is like you're taking a population that's also, you know, European based, right? They're not built, but they're wearing sunglasses, they're wearing sunscreen, like they're doing all the wrong things, and then really in a super high UV environment. getting exposed to the sun. So
it's looking like a 0.03 chance versus a 0.04 chance of getting it. So really, what are we obsessing about?
It's a 1% increase.
Like you said, it's not saying that it like is just unilaterally the sun that's causing it. It's saying like, my hypothesis with the Australia data is just that like people get more fucking sunburns. Like they're getting burnt a lot. They're Europeans down in like one of the highest UV environments on the planet. They're not doing it appropriately. They're just going to the beach. They have like bad circadian habits. They have bad light habits. Like, they're using sunscreen all the time and then it rubs off and they forget about it and their skin's totally unprepared and they get burned. Right. So it's reasonable to think like, okay, like it's a
chemical sunscreens too.
Yeah, it's a riskier environment for these sorts of people because it's just higher stakes. It's not that your body can't adapt to that higher intensity, but it's that your body needs to adapt to that. It's literally like saying like you have two gyms. One of them, when you go into and like it's first time deadlifters, people that have never deadlifted before. And in one of the gyms, the starting weight is like 135. It's the bar and 245 plates. But at this other gym, the starting weight, they won't let you lift unless it's 225. It's 2 plates. That gym's going to have higher injury rates, not because deadlifts are bad, but because you're having everybody start at a higher intensity. And, it's a similar thing.
I think people underestimate how little sun Europe gets actually. And I've used this as like a pro like Rocky Mountain region because we get, well, first off, the latitudes are actually like I'm equivalent to like Italy and in Wyoming, and then the sun level is the same. It's like we're equivalent here to like Spain and almost Northern Africa levels, and then like Phoenix and Florida or Arizona, New Mexico, Florida. You guys are definitely Northern Africa levels of like sun exposure, whereas like Scandinavia and Central Europe is so much less sun. So you have to think about that. It's all context, right? So yeah, the risk profile inherently, if you just move down to Florida or you're in Australia, which is even lower or, lower latitude in terms of difference to the equator, your UV is much higher. So it all matters in terms of context, but I think that encapsulates it well is, guys, what did we say at the beginning of this podcast, right? Like, if it was working, the recommendations, skin cancer rates would be going down. People would be healthier. Everyone would be happier. This is not the case at all, right? Like, this is why we're Bitcoiners, because we question the mainstream narrative. So I don't understand when people are just sending us studies, isolated light studies that are probably done under blue light and taking UV in isolation without the more restorative healing red and infrared wavelengths from full spectrum sunlight, shining them on people who live completely inconsistent ancestral lifestyles in terms of light habits, probably do eat, we didn't even talk about diet, seed oils, that's a big one for sunburn. It can make a difference because polyunsaturated fats that are oxidized can get into the cell membrane and oxidize and disrupt your mitochondria. Like, probably less important than light maybe, but evidently people are unhealthier. The tolerance for oxidative stress is going to be lower, and cancer rates and chronic disease rates are going to be higher. So come on, guys.
I think the best thing to point to here is data out of Asian countries. So Asian countries are very fixated on sun avoidance, like light skin, very prioritized. China, Japan, South Korea, tons of skin whitening. They avoid the sun very heavily. Even there, melanoma rates up to the right. And it's not sampling bias. People will be like, oh, well, maybe people are going to the doctor more. People are not going to the doctor more in 2020 versus 2010 or 2010 versus no, people are not going to the doctor more 5% per year. Right? Like you're saying, like melanoma rates are going up 3-5% per year. It's not like there's this everyone's as a population is just flooding the doc. We've been going to the doctor as a society, for the last 30 or 40 years, 50 years. Like that didn't change. It's not sampling bias. Like melanoma rates are legitimately up everywhere on the globe, but we can look to Asian countries for that's like nirvana for sun avoider doctors. If that's the population that takes that recommendation really seriously, and they're still getting these exploding melanoma rates.
Yeah, and maybe final point is what has changed. Artificial light exposure, time spent indoors.
Yep.
Outdoor exposure, outdoor light, all going down. The artificial stuff all going up. So it's all context dependent. And guess what? If the sun really caused skin cancer and like killed people, I mean, we wouldn't be here. We literally lived outside for hundreds of thousands of years. But guess what? Our ancestors weren't stupid. They didn't spend all day in the bright, really, high radiation UV.
They weren't laying back on the
they weren't tanning.
Africa. Like, that's not what they're doing, right? I've made this point too, because also, like, I think walking is a supernatural way to get sun exposure. Mm-hmm. Why? You're constantly getting the sun from different angles because you're walking, you're in and out of shade. It's not just like, I'm going to lay and it's just going to bake one side of my body direct at the highest intensity for hours. Like, you're moving around. It's hitting you from different angles. You're getting it in different ways. You're under a tree. You're not under a tree. Like, it's this very organic process. And so again, like if that's like a control, and like what we're saying is like, people on a Miami rooftop, like laying on the sun lounger, just like baking. That's also not like super evolution. Like, I'm not saying that's like bad or whatever, or you shouldn't do that, but it's obviously like a higher intensity than what you would get otherwise.
Yeah, no, the shade thing's really important. And I mean, you look at the melanin levels of, like sub-Saharan Africans, right? Like they're dark. It's for a reason, right? But they still went into shade, and that's kind of natural. But that input signal was still there for the light because they're outside. So again, it's all context dependent. Think logically, right? People at the end of the day, were we meant to be in the sun? Yes. Are you of European skin, fair descent? Probably. A lot of us are. So you are technically biologically designed to be able to adapt faster, get tan faster, but also burn faster. So use that context. And then the adverse is true. If you are of African descent, you really should not be living at like northern latitudes. And if you are, you need to be really deliberate about sun exposure, because it's going to take 2, 3, 4x as long to generate all the benefits from sun exposure. So that's, actually we have more flexibility, but we have to be more careful. So that all matters. But yeah, I guess final thoughts on sun here.
Yeah. And there's even enormous variation among Europeans, right? Like,
yes,
the Swedes get dark. Like, I don't know why, but they tan, whereas like the Irish like do not. So even among Europeans, there's like huge variation. Like, I tan, but I also know people who didn't tan and then tanned. Like, I know people whose body, I don't have any data on this. This is anecdotal.
Well, red hair, I think red hair, there's some like genetic mutation in like the conversion of like going from generating more pheomelanin to like eumelanin. I've read one paper on it, but I'm not totally sure.
So I have a friend who's Irish, red hair, green eyes, would like get freckles. They just get freckles if they're in the sun. But then she started just like working outside in Florida. She's like, and she started tanning. I don't know.
I think that's probably more so the reason, but there is something in there from like a biological perspective that's a little, I don't know, gingers are mutant, and I'm a little ginger, so I guess I can say that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just essential. It's simple. Like, so closing thoughts, like, I can put a pile of studies that back up everything I'm saying, and everyone that argues with me can get a pile of studies that says, UV light's super bad and you should, drink sunscreen. And like, and then we can debate for months about the validity and the design of those studies. And even like the data, because we live in the replication crisis, and so many academics have been basically sued for falsifying data. And who knows, like, science is not neutral. Data is not neutral. It's fallible in the same human ways as everything else. that's an exhausting black hole to go into, right? Like it's exhausting. Let's start from first principles. Let's just keep our heads on straight. We grew up, we evolved. Every fucking creature on this planet evolved in the sun. The sun is good for you. Like there's such a thing as too much. You know what it feels like. It feels bad. Too much feels bad. The right amount feels good. Do the thing that feels good and avoid the thing that feels bad. Like, let's keep this simple. Like, the sun is not bad for you. Don't get burned. Like, be reasonable. If you're driving a car 90 miles per hour on the highway, you can wear sunglasses. Like, if you're in your backyard, you probably shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, there it is, right? Like, do we really trust like academia and the mainstream medical science? And I have a book in front of me that encapsulates this well from Robert O. Becker's. In 1985, he wrote this about, research in the medical system, medical community. And it says, the present system is in effect a dogmatic religion with a self-perpetuating priesthood dedicated only to preserving the current orthodoxies. So, and if you don't know who Robert O. Becker is and Body Electric, you should read this. It's a great book, and it'll open your eyes about a lot of things. But in general, it's your own life. We're just trying to empower you through education, and you can make your own decision. But I do want to talk about Bitcoin a little bit. So you still got a little bit of time?
Yeah, I got a little bit. Let's do another 10 minutes.
Okay. So, yeah, Bitcoin macro situation, Swan. What do you do at Swan?
Yeah, maybe I'll introduce myself.
Quick introduction.
Yeah. So, hour and a half in, I'll introduce myself. But so I actually run the private wealth team for Swan Bitcoin. So actually what I do as a day job has pretty much nothing to do with this, except that I'm pretty well known on Bitcoin Twitter for this stuff. So I don't know, kind of merging. But we do a white glove concierge service for high net worth investors. So I work with family offices and wealthy individuals that are navigating the Bitcoin space. And, we're basically the leading concierge team. What that means is like, unlike Coinbase and these exchanges, like we're on the phone with clients. We're helping them navigate these transactions, accounts, trust accounts, retirement accounts, business accounts, corporate accounts, all these sort of things. So we do a ton there. We're the largest kind of concierge service in the Bitcoin space. And yeah, it's been I've done that for the last basically 3 years since we launched the private client team. So I lead it. I've led it for the last 3 years. And it's, grown to be a very large part of Swan's business.
Awesome. So just cutting to, some important things. There's a lot going on in the Bitcoin space right now, ETFs, being approved or more people filing. I saw like Fidelity thing today.
Yeah.
And it's looking up. We're going into the halving, next year in 2024. A lot of mining companies are doing anything they can to expand their operations to mine more Bitcoin before the halving, of course. So yeah, I guess, how do you see everything that's going on in the macro environment kind of laid out? Interest rates, they're paused, but maybe a couple more raises, and then, we're kind of at an unprecedented time here with the rates being so high. Debt payments at the federal level are extremely high. Bitcoin seems to be inversely correlated, or at least breaking correlation to the trad markets. How do you kind of see things right now? Are you bullish on these ETFs? You think they're kind of, just more BS from the trad system? And do you think there is? I personally think that there's going to be a very deflationary event soon from this dramatic rise in interest rates. But how do you see kind of the 12 to 18 months here? Not in price prediction or anything, just concerns, things that you're looking at that are really interesting, and the decisions the Fed has made. You think they're correct, good, bad, or you're still waiting for this soft landing?
Yeah, no, I mean, don't think the Fed is, I don't think, in many ways, I don't think the Fed should exist.
Yeah.
Not even the same argument that most people make, but I believe in natural interest rates. I believe that markets set interest rates through organic transactions between lenders and borrowers, and any attempt to centrally manage interest rates is flawed. It just is flawed. Like a central agency does not know what the price of time should be, because that's what interest is. We're pricing time. How the fuck are you supposed to determine what the right number is? So no, I don't think there. I think a lot of the problems we've seen are the result of Fed policy decisions of artificially keeping rates at the zero bound for far too long and low, and then artificially jacking those rates up to higher levels. Neither of those decisions was correct. That being said, I've been on the record since kind of the Bitcoin conference. I did an interview with Kitco News, and I said, my top for rates is 6.5%. Not saying we get there. I'm saying we just don't go higher than there. Meaning, I think we're much closer to the end than the beginning. I think that's obvious. I've been saying this from before the pause. So, are they going to pause for a while? Is maybe another 25 basis points, maybe 2 more 25. Sure, whatever. I don't care about predicting with that level of minutia. The broad strokes is that they're almost done. And my basic heuristic for relating to modern financial markets is asset prices must go up. The solvency, there's too much debt, there's too much leverage. The system cannot sustain a prolonged and severe drawdown in asset prices. Tax receipts collapse and fall off a cliff. And, then basically it's either like stop spending, default on the debt, or print the difference. And the option would always be print the difference, which even if we got there would then drive asset prices right back up, right? So there's this kind of way that you can't have like a 10-year bear market. It just doesn't exist at these levels of leverage and debt. So asset prices will go up. They will ease, they will stimulate. But also something I'll say is I'm increasingly convinced that the Fed is no longer driving the car here. And that it's really the fiscal authority and the Treasury, and that what is really more dominant in this market is fiscal spending. And so the Fed could keep rates here, or they could lower rates a little bit. But what really matters is the Treasury going to keep spending into the economy, and are they going to increase that rate of spending? And my answer to both is yes. I think we're going to see a huge amount of spending for decarbonization, for reindustrialization, for reshoring. The last two, totally agree with. First one, I think we should do with nuclear, but yes, agree with it there. I think, decarbonizing via big investments in nuclear energy, I think that's the way. I think best of both worlds. But I don't think that's what they're going to spend it on, but that would be the way to do it. But yeah, they're gonna spend for decarbonization. They're gonna spend for reindustrialization. They're gonna spend for reshoring, and they're gonna spend for social programs. And even if the Fed keeps rates at whatever the fuck at 2 or 3 or 4%, if that happens, you're still looking at the stimulatory effect. What people don't get, I'm a skeptic of the modern narrative on rate hikes' ability to control inflation. It's not that they don't do anything, but let's look at Argentina. In Argentina, the interest rate is over 40% or something. Might be wrong, maybe 30%, 40%. It's very high, much higher than here. There is a 20% tax anytime you transfer someone money in your bank account. So if I send you $1,000 in Argentina from my bank to your bank, they take 20% of it automatically. And sales taxes, other taxes are super high. This is a high rate environment on absolute anabolic steroids. And inflation is still over 100%. To me, that shows you can't just bring it down with rates, right? Because that's not what inflation is, right? Inflation is increasing the money supply, full stop. That's what it is. And then consumer price increases can happen because of monetary inflation, but they can also happen because of your fundamental economic condition, supply and demand, the goods you're producing, what your exports and imports are. So it's just not the full picture. What the US needs is not higher rates, it's growth. It's fundamental development. It is, in some ways, it is reindustrialization. It is reshoring. It is building a U.S. economy that is not this two-tiered system where you have service sector workers at McDonald's and Denny's and big box stores and Best Buy making like no money. And then you have tech and finance making all the money. And you have our smartest, best people going to optimize advertising algorithms for Google or Facebook. Like, that's not the way. You need fundamental development. You need, what's an alternative to synthetic nitrogen fertilizer? How do we change our, transportation? How do we evolve our communication? Like, you need these fundamental developments, not VR, metaverse, headset, advertising, digital. We need physical growth. We need improvements. That's the solution to inflation. I don't know that we're going to get it, but.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think for sure, like economic growth, and I write about this, is like pretty much like economic growth is the only way to keep like the Ponzi scheme going. But we've seen that in the form of like this crap, right? Like, more processed foods, just tech trying to sell us more and more consumerism and ads and digital things that have no conceptual value, right? So I think that's a really important point. I haven't heard truck driving by. I haven't heard many people say that is like the economic growth really isn't the issue. It's the type of growth and the type of investments that we're making, because inherently the ones we've made have no value. But if we are, investing in things like nuclear or transportation infrastructure and things that would actually move society forward, and get more people out of, these social dictatorships that they're in terms of, just being at the whims of big tech, is actually might be beneficial for society, but I don't see that happening either.
Yeah, it's challenging, right? Like and that's the thing, because like growth and the way we measure it, I mean, GDP is kind of a scam, right? Like what GDP really is the velocity of money. It's how fast money changes hands. That's not the same as growth, right? Like I can engineer an economy where, like if I made the tax code 10 times more complicated, more money would change hands, right? Like payments to accountants. We'd need so many more CPAs and people would be paying those accountants, and then those accountants would be buying things. Is that growth? That's not growth. Like we need to redefine what growth is in this sense. And it needs to be, I've argued that the proper definition of growth should be an expanded ability to exert human will. Full stop. Like more will, more ability for humans to do things in new ways, the way they want to do them, and to control the outcomes and the side effects. Like that's like on a really rudimentary level, that's like what growth is. We invented technology that allows us to do something we couldn't do, or refines our ability to do something we already do in a new way, or changes, even I would say like changes, like you could start building circadian homes, and I would call that growth, right? Because you're improving the well-being of the population, and then those people are going to be more productive, they're going to be healthier, they're going to have lower healthcare costs, right? So there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but the moral of the story is that making money go faster is not growth. That's just velocity. And growth has to be actual changes in our lives.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But the issue I see with that is just like there's no way that's going to be valued in like the way our system's currently set up. Like the healthcare system is set up so that the sick people are spending more money and the economy is making more money. There's more growth from unhealthy people. People like you and I, we're like the government's worst nightmare in terms of economic like input, because we're, we don't need to go to the doctor. We don't have 6 medications, we don't buy a bunch of random shit from like these big companies. But that's just how it's set up now. Like, obviously, I think that's because of all the, decisions that were made over the past 20, 30 years. They chose the easy way every single time. And now we're stuck in this like, oh, shit, yeah, we do spend trillions on healthcare. But guess what? That was because that's how we're achieving like this growth. And now what if we, saved, half that money and then invested it into other things and then saw growth in that facet? And
so that's you open up the door to a really important point. And it's like, so why do they need that growth? Like, wait, why is that? Yeah, you're
that's the
correct.
question.
Like the word, like I like me and you are probably like the worst case scenario, right? Like I don't take any medications. I basically don't go to the doctor. Like I don't have anything going on. So like I spend zero money there. But I also like, I don't buy a lot of stuff. Like I'm not a consumer. Like I just save.
Yep.
I fucking save. I save all the money I make, like within reason. Like, and so like I'm not doing that. Like, with some, sometimes I do something, like, whatever. I buy things I want or need. It's just like I'm not doing that like frivolously. And so like I'm circulating less money. But so why is that a problem? It's because of the Ponzi nature of the debt scenario, right? This is only an issue because we need these ever increasing payments on an ever larger pile of debt. There's no inherent problem with people saving money. It's actually prudent, and economies throughout history had that. There is not this inherent thing that like economic systems collapse if people don't consume. It's just that you get deflation, and then deflation makes it harder to pay the debt. Only an over-indebted economy has this problem, right? And that brings us back to Bitcoin, and that brings us back to some of these considerations where like the only reason this is an issue, like we should live in an economy where people can save, and that's not a threat to the economy, where we don't need to juice spending on all of this nonsense to keep the economy going. That's a fragile economy. That's not a healthy economy. People should be able to save their money, their capital, and they should choose to intelligently deploy it at the times that suit them, whether that is in investments. Anybody, if presented with an excellent investment opportunity, will want to invest in that. It just needs to be a good one, right? Like people are allowed to sit on their money until an entrepreneur comes to them with a truly excellent idea that they want to support and be part of. And that's how it happens. Like we can be more selective with what we give capital to. And this growth model has produced a world where like, it's like spray and pray. It's just like billions of dollars through the venture capital firms. Let's just invest in fucking everything and something will win. Right? Like, and ultimately that's all propped up by like a historical easy money environment. And so what would it be like if it was more that like they were more capital constrained? There wasn't this like baseline bailout built into the bedrock of the system, and there wasn't this easy money environment. It's like, okay, we've got $100 million to invest. Let's be really selective about who we give it to. Let's give it to real entrepreneurs with good ideas, with a high chance of success. Like that works too. In many ways, it could be better because you get around this problem of capital misallocation. You get around this issue where like, if we fund WeWork with like billions of dollars, and then WeWork hires like 40 of the smartest people in the world to work on fucking gamifying office space, then those people are not working on alternatives to nitrogen fertilizer. They're not working on nuclear power development. They're not like the intelligence is not fungible. Human capital talent is not fungible. Like a person isn't a person isn't a person. There are geniuses. There are 10x, 100x performers. And if you kind of Cantillon effect all the cheap money to these bloated firms and they hire all of those great people, then they're working on Facebook. They're not working on these other things, right? And so it all kind of ties together where we're racing against the clock of this debt because we've pursued a debt-based growth model, but that very growth model has created enormous capital misallocation and a fragile economy where we need these ever-increasing Ponzi schemes just to keep the lights on. And it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, totally. So much talent is just being wasted, I think, with this consumer bullshit model. But my last question is, I know you need to go, is how do you see this playing out? Like it's, we're racing, we're on the last leg here of this debt Ponzi scheme. Do you think there's a natural balancing mechanism, and we have a slow Bitcoin adoption, and maybe that becomes more and more popular as people become more empowered? Or do you think the acceleration of Bitcoin inherently increases rapidly, the velocity increases rapidly, and which is probably bad for society? It'd be more chaotic, of course, but yeah, I've talked a lot about this with people. I talked to Matt Hill from Star9, and he's definitely of the slow and slow is preferred, and ultimately thinks we're gonna win. What do you think on this?
I mean, preferably you want it low and slow. You want enough time for people to own some. These ETFs present an enormous risk to that, right? Like you have BlackRock, you have Fidelity. What happens? American financial capital owns 70% of the Bitcoin. Wealth inequality on steroids, right? Like, and I'm not somebody that thinks like, the world, like everyone should have the same amount of money and that's it anyway, like a good state of the world. Like I'm not like a certain level of like natural variation and inequality is both natural and preferable. But this is like wealth inequality on steroids, right? Like if Bitcoin does what we think it will do, and these ETFs come in and all of these assets get wrapped up in US financial markets, like it's super disruptive. So low and slow is absolutely preferable. You don't want this like sudden hyper Bitcoinization. It's not good. It's destabilizing. But to answer your question, I'm kind of going to give you a very unsatisfying answer. And it's that I don't know which way it will go. And nobody does. And you can't know. This is one of those things that like, there's so many pathways that could take it one way or the other that like you can't predict. Like if every one of your predictions has a 10% margin of error and you have to make 10 predictions, you're wrong. Like you got it wrong. Like you're wrong for sure. One of them's wrong. And if it relies on all of those things, like you don't know. There's too much uncertainty in that for anybody to know. So I don't know, but I can say very clearly, I pray it is gradual and non-disruptive.
Yeah, and I'm the same boat, and of course it's a rhetorical question, what nobody knows. But I think what's important is the mindset that you have around the future is being optimistic, right? I think it's easy, especially in the health and Bitcoin space, to get very negative and just blow up the world. Bitcoin will go to 1 million. This would be great. No, it'd be terrible. The quality of life would be very poor. You want it to be gradual. You want more people to be empowered. But if you're very fearful, if you're not as decentralized as you want to be, you need to take actionable steps to get there. And, getting in control of your health through a lot of what we talked about today, via free or low cost mechanisms. And then, owning Bitcoin, checking out what Swan's doing. That's what you need to do. And that's it.
And then one closing thought, you said free or low cost. And like, I want to echo that point just for people listening. The only reason I talk about this is because it changed my life. I have nothing to sell you. I don't have a product. I don't have a newsletter. I don't have a supplement brand. I don't have a coaching service. I don't have fucking anything. I've never made a single dollar from talking about like the sun or this. Like I have nothing to sell you. The only reason I do this is because it changed my life. And I think and I've seen it change other people's lives like that. I have like no skin in the game on a financial level. I'm not marketing myself. I don't have a fucking company. Like I do something completely different for work. So, we live in a world of so much promotion and marketing. And so I share that, just to say like, I don't benefit from you believing me on this in any way. I just think you should.
Steven's sponsored by Big Sun.
Yeah,
no, it's important. Yeah, and it's hard for me. I'm navigating this health, space, and it's
not like there's anything wrong with doing that.
No,
there's nothing wrong with doing that.
It's like the things that move the needle the most are low cost and free, and it's like, I don't want to just shill you a bunch of stuff, and it's like it's so easy to get caught up in supplements and taking the easy way out, but these fundamental lifestyle changes, the best health hacks are free or low cost, like making some swaps, light bulbs, diet swaps, whatever. That will move the needle the most, but it takes actual substantial effort from yourself. So, but Steven's story is empowering. Thank you so much, man, for joining.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. We'll keep the dialogue on Twitter going, everyone. So where can people find you? Last thing that's important?
Yeah, just look up my name, Stephen Lubka, on Twitter. Just look for me. You'll find the profile. And yeah, I'm super active on Twitter. DM's always open. Literally, just reach out. I'm like generally like very responsive to everybody. So I'm just there on Twitter to chat and make friends. Like that's really it. Like I just have a great time. I meet interesting people. I get to have great conversations like this. Like that's why I'm on Twitter. So reach out.
Amazing. Thanks, Stephen. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for tuning in.